All right, let's take a look at the Oakland Raiders and see what did they do during the 2008 offseason, both in the free agency and the draft. What did they do to try to improve their team from last season? Well, first let's look and see how much money, how much cap space did they have to work with. Not a huge amount. They had some money to work with. You can see they had about $20 million to start the off season. As of August, they had about $5 million remaining. So they got a little bit of cushion there. But overall, they don't have a ton of cap space to make a lot of moves at this point. I want to take a look at some of the guys who at the beginning of the preseason, the beginning of the offseason, I thought were guys that could potentially be cut. Okay? Not guys that I thought would definitely be cut, but guys that I thought theoretically could be cut. Michael Crabtree was one of them. And the reason was because, one, you can see his numbers dropped. He still had 8 touchdowns, which is quite a lot. But you can see he only had 58 catches last season. That was the lowest number he had basically since 2010. There was the 2013 season where he missed 11 games, but it was one of the worst seasons Michael Crabtree has had in many, many years. You can see he had 618 yards. So, when you have a receiver who's going to be turning 31 near the beginning of the season, and then his numbers are starting to drop, it may be time to get out, early rather than get out late. So, actually, I'm a big Michael Crabtree fan, and I like his game. I like what he's able to do. I like big receivers, big, fast receivers. But I don't blame Oakland for letting him go. I thought that might be what happened, because they could save $7.6 million by cutting him, and then another $8.2 million next season, and there was no dead money. So this was something that made some sense. Crabtree was not out of work long. Baltimore quickly scooped him up and gave him 3 years and $21 million. So that'll be an interesting one to watch and see how does that work out for Baltimore. He is 31 years old. Is he still going to be able to create separation and put up a lot of big numbers there in Baltimore? Seth Roberts was another guy that I thought was at risk of being cut. You had a guy who had 455 yards last season, 1 touchdown. They would save about $2.5 million if they cut him, almost $4.5 million if they traded him. So I thought, wow, here there's a guy who might be let go to free up some room, but it seems so far they've decided to hold on to him. Cordarrelle Patterson was another guy that I thought might be cut in order to free up some cap space. And he wasn't cut, but he was traded. He was coming off one of his least productive seasons. You can see there, 31 catches, 309 yards. He had that season in 2015. Look at that, 16 games and only 2 catches. But other than that, this wasn't his best season. So, didn't surprise me that they wanted to save the $3.25 million, and they traded him to New England, where New England is pretty desperate for wide receivers right now. Bruce Irvin was another name that I thought. Now look, some Raiders fans are going to think I'm crazy. I see the numbers there: 58 tackles, 8 sacks, 10 tackles for a loss. He had a great year. I'm not saying that I thought he would definitely be cut. What I'm saying is, here's a guy who they could have saved $8 million in space with no dead money, And if they really, really needed the space, he was one of the guys that might be at risk. Now, they've decided to hold on to him. I think that was a good move. But for a guy who is probably approaching 30, it was just somebody to keep an eye on. I'm not saying I thought they should cut him, just a guy that I thought people need to keep an eye on, because he's been in the league for quite a while. This is going to be his 7th season, so he's got a big salary. But hopefully he will still be around. I think he will be, and he'll be able to produce quite a lot for that Raider defense. Sean Smith was another guy that I thought would probably be gone, and of course he was. I mean, he performed pretty poorly and had an $8.5 million salary that was due, so that was quite a no-brainer. David Amerson, another guy, another cornerback who didn't play very well at all last year for Oakland. They saved $6 million by letting him go. So, I mean, if you think about it, just between Michael Crabtree, Sean Smith, and David Amerson, they freed up another more than $20 million in cap space. Amerson was signed by Kansas City, but you can see he had to take a big pay cut. They gave him a 1-year, $2.25 million deal, and that's what happens when you don't play very well. You got to take a pay cut. It's not like the NBA or baseball where you get these guaranteed contracts. Offensive unrestricted free agents. There weren't many guys that were on the offense that were up for free agency that I thought, wow, this is a really important guy, and the Raiders really need to make sure that they, think about whether or not they should hold on to this guy. So there weren't any really key guys on offense that they were at risk of losing. On defense, however, it's a bit of another story. They had Navarro Bowman last year. He started out in San Francisco, and they cut him in the middle of the year. It was very, very surprising. And he performed great after being released from San Francisco. I mean, you can see there, look at those middle linebacker numbers. Just crazy. 143 tackles, 148 tackles, 145 tackles and 5 sacks, 154 tackles. Got lots of tackles for a loss there. Great player. Had that horrible injury in San Francisco. Came back, had 38 tackles in 5 games. Wasn't doing badly. But San Francisco decided to move on in the middle of the year. Very surprising. Oakland scooped him up, and he really performed well. 89 tackles in 10 games for Oakland with 5 tackles for a loss. But surprisingly, they didn't bring him back. At least they haven't brought him back so far. He's still on the open market right now. No one's picked him up. Packers supposedly have thought about bringing him in because Jake Ryan's out. Tore his ACL, but Navarro Bowman still hasn't found work. I know he's going to be 30 this coming season, but 89 tackles in 10 games. What do you want? TJ Carey is another free agent that contributed a lot last year. Was a starting corner. Was solid overall. He had some bad moments for sure, but most corners have some bad moments. But he also had some good moments. Versatile player, can play in the slot. Maybe does better in the slot. He had a pretty good end to his rookie contract. He was a guy that was drafted in the 7th round back in 2014. And Cleveland ended up signing him for $31 million. 4 years, $31 million. So TJ Carey finally had one good year and was able to get a big contract from the Browns. We'll see how that pans out for them. Denico Autry, defensive end, was a starter there in Oakland. Had 36 tackles and 5 sacks. Really good numbers. Played well. And he was playing on a 1-year tender worth $1.7 million. So that proved to be great value for the Raiders last year. When you can get a defensive end with 36 tackles and 5 sacks for $1.7 million, that's good excellent value. He was able to turn that into a 3-year, $17.8 million deal with the Colts. So the Raiders let him go, which that one I don't know about. That's a tough loss. Justin Ellis was a free agent, and see, this is the thing. Autry signed 3-year, $17.8 million deal. Justin Ellis got brought back for 3 years and $13.5 million. Justin Ellis had a huge year. 4th round pick in 2014. Last year had 48 tackles. It's great for a defensive tackle, but at the same time, where do you get those tackles? Do you get those tackles, behind the line of scrimmage or near the line of scrimmage, or is the guy getting 3 or 4 yards before you finally tackle him? Justin Ellis is not a bad player, not at all. But I wouldn't say he's a great player either. He's never had more than 2 tackles for a loss, never had even 1 sack, a full sack in a season. So I don't know. We'll see. Justin Ellis had a good year, not a great year, but he got a 3-year, $13.5 million deal from the Raiders. With Reggie Nelson, he was also a free agent. He's going to be 35 next season. Did not have a great year. Not a bad year, but not a great year. What do you expect for a guy who's 34? Oakland has some younger safeties that they could have replaced him with. He was getting paid $4.25 million a year, but they decided to bring him back for 1 more year at $2.5 million. Maybe he'll be kind of a third option there, number 3 safety, first guy off the bench, provide some depth. But I guess they decided to bring back Reggie Nelson, so we'll see how that works out. Keith McGill is another safety who was a free agent. Was not very productive last year. Originally was a 4th round pick. Did better on special teams, but so far he still doesn't have any work. Let's look at all of the major changes that have happened this offseason on the Raiders roster. One change is that they brought in Doug Martin to compete at running back. Obviously, this was a John Gruden move, okay, because John Gruden was with Tampa, and Doug Martin had a couple of, notice that a couple. He was there for 6 years and had a couple of good seasons. I don't know. We'll see if Doug Martin can make the team. I would be surprised. At wide receiver, a lot of changes on the roster at wide receiver, and we've talked about some of them. Michael Crabtree was gone. He was scheduled to make a little over $7 million per year, $7-8 million per year. Cordarrelle Patterson was traded to New England. There's his numbers on the right-hand side of the screen. How did they try to replace those guys and their production? Nearly 1,000 yards between them. So how did they try to do that? Well, for one, they brought in Jordy Nelson, who was cut by the Packers. He'll probably be a slot receiver, a big threat in the slot. And they traded for Martavis Bryant, who was unhappy there in Pittsburgh. So they brought him over for, I think it was like a 3rd round pick, something like that. Dwayne Harris was a reserve player. Griff Whalen was a reserve player. He had less than 50 yards in 10 games in the last 2 seasons. Ryan Switzer, he was received in exchange for Jihad Ward in that trade. And then Marcel Aitman was a 7th round pick. So, the key 2 guys that they brought in were Jordy Nelson and Martavis Bryant. But those are huge, man. That is huge to bring those 2 guys in. And overall, listen, I really like Michael Crabtree a lot. It'll be interesting to, they're both over 30. So it'll be very interesting to see how this works out. And they received very similar money. You see that? Crabtree was due $15.8 million over the next 2 seasons, and he was cut. And then they gave $15 million to Nelson over 2 seasons. So they just kind of swapped them out. Let's compare their numbers. Jordy Nelson is on the right. That's why it says Green Bay. There's Michael Crabtree on the left. You can see Jordy Nelson, huge years. Okay, 1,200, 1,300, 1,500, 1,200, double-digit touchdowns. Now granted, look, I love David Carr. Love David Carr. But he is also not Aaron Rodgers, okay? But you can see there last season without Aaron Rodgers, Jordy Nelson had 482 yards and 6 touchdowns. Now, David Carr certainly is better than the backup that Green Bay was playing with last year. So, you expect Jordy Nelson to bounce back. But the guy's 33 years old. He's even older than Michael Crabtree. So that is going to be something I will be interested in looking at this year. How does Michael Crabtree do with Baltimore? How does Jordy Nelson do with Oakland? Because those 2 guys were swapped out playing a little musical wide receivers. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for both guys. There's Martavis Bryant. Big numbers. 549 yards in rookie season, 765 yards and 6 touchdowns the next year, and then last year 600 yards and 3 touchdowns. So, to have those 2 guys on the outside, starting on the outside for Oakland, Amari Cooper, Martavis Bryant, and then Jordy Nelson in the slot, that's dangerous. Marshawn Lynch, the offense provided what the offensive tackles can do. Depending on if the offensive tackles can play at a high level, Oakland should have a really, really good offense. Tight end, Clive Walford, out. Okay, didn't even have 100 yards receiving last year. Derek Carrier in. He's another kind of number 3 tight end. No major change for the Raiders there. I mean, it's not a big upgrade or a big downgrade. At tackle, Marshall Newhouse is out. He started last year but played very, very poorly. So they brought in Colton Miller in the first round. Most people expect, will start at right tackle. But the big question, another question is whether they're going to keep Donald Penn or whether he'll be cut. I can't imagine. I mean, I know that they would save some money, but I don't think. I mean, he's right now. He's on the players unable to perform list. I don't know. I would be shocked because if they cut him, who is gonna play the other tackle spot? You got Brino Giacomini, who was a starter last season, but he didn't get. He's not back there with Houston because he was not very good. Brandon Parker, 3rd round rookie. And Brino, they gave him a 1-year, $3 million deal. That's not like starting tackle money. That's, maybe swing tackle money. So, I'd have to assume they keep Donald Penn. But that's a precarious situation there at tackle. That's the thing that the Raiders need to worry about. At guard, they have Ian Silberman they brought in. He was more of a practice squad player, so far, as well as Cameron Hunt. But the Raiders have one of the best starting interior offensive lines in football. So these guys were brought in for depth. At defensive end, as we mentioned, Denico Autry gone. That is a big loss. Really was. Really will be. And Jihad Ward was a rotational defensive end. That's another guy that won't be back. How are they going to try to replace those guys? Well, they're bringing in Cornelius Carradine from the 49ers. I don't know. He only played in 8 games last season. You can see he's missed quite a few games over his career. I don't think that is going to make up for the loss of Denico Autry, and they drafted Arden Key in the 3rd round to provide some depth, perhaps to replace Jihad Ward. So I think we've taken a small step backward at least on defensive end, if you're a Raiders fan. Defensive tackle, however, they drafted P.J. Hall in the 2nd round and Maurice Hurst in the 5th round. You know, and I shouldn't say this, but, you know, okay, how about this? If Maurice Hurst can stay healthy, if he doesn't have heart trouble, I don't want to make light of heart trouble. I'm worried about the guy, honestly. I mean, so all jokes aside, how tragic, how horrible would it be if Maurice Hurst, like, just died on the field? No one would ever forget that, ever. So, you know, some doctors cleared him to play. I hope he's able to stay healthy. I really, really do. He's a great talent. And shoot, if the Raiders can pick him up in the 5th round and he stays healthy, you know, wow. That should really help their defensive line a lot. So I'm rooting for him. I hope he does stay healthy. I really do, especially when it comes to a heart. Atiba Rubin, another guy, backup, you know, defensive tackle, kind of a veteran player they brought in, and Frosty Rucker. I don't think both those guys are going to make the roster. I mean, the Raiders are stacked at defensive tackle, to be honest with you. You almost hope that they can somehow find someone to exchange, you know, one of their defensive tackles for a defensive end, because they're looking a lot better at tackle than they are at end on the defense. At linebacker, a lot of changes. A lot of changes at linebacker. Navarro Bowman, mentioned, started last year. Not at the beginning of the season, but after they brought him over. You know, they haven't... I guess they just haven't offered him enough money because they don't have a lot of cap space. But it's very surprising they haven't brought back Bowman. But no one's brought him in. Corey James was a number 4 linebacker. Kind of one of those first guys off the bench. Tyrell Adams and Xavier Woodson-Luster, both reserve players. They won't be back. How are they going to replace these guys? Well, they brought in Tahir Whitehead. Big couple years there in Detroit. You can see 132 tackles in 2016, 110 tackles, but 8 tackles for a loss last season. You know, he can do a little bit of everything, so that's going to really help. They brought in Derek Johnson. Tahir Whitehead will probably play one of the outside spots, and Derek Johnson will play the inside spot. It'll be interesting to see how much left Derek Johnson has in the tank. He won't get all of the snaps, but, you know, it'll be interesting to see how much he can contribute. He'll probably play on early downs rather than on passing downs. Kyle Wilbur, a reserve player. Emmanuel Lemure, that's a good reserve player. Played with Minnesota. And then Azim Victor. They drafted him in the 6th round. So I'd say overall the Raiders probably upgraded a little bit at linebacker. So they improved at defensive tackle. They improved a little bit at linebacker. Probably took a little bit of step back at defensive end. What about at corner? That's where they really need to improve. T.J. Carey gone, got 4 years and $31 million from Cleveland. Sean Smith gone, but he was not very good. And David Amerson gone. So you can see your number 1, number 2, and number 4 corners all gone. How are they going to replace that? Well, they try to replace it. They brought in Rashawn Melvin, who played fairly well with the Colts, I believe. They also brought in Daryl Worley, who I think started there in Carolina. They brought in Sharice Wright, who is not very good in Buffalo. Leon Hall as a backup player. Nick Nelson, they drafted him in the 4th round. Yeah, I don't know. This is going to be the Achilles heel for the Raiders. That, from my perspective. You know, I think teams are going to really pass all over you again. I really do. It'll be hard. It probably won't be easy to run the ball on the Raiders, but I don't know that you really fix your secondary in a way that you needed to. I mean, Rashawn Melvin's not bad. I mean, that's a decent... I mean, none of these guys are bad. Darryl Worley's not bad. But these guys are guys that are going to be able to, not get torched. But are they going to be game changers? Are they going to be locked down? Are they going to be like Revis Island? I don't see any guy there that you're going to be able to, if you play Antonio Brown, who's going to cover Antonio Brown? Which one of these guys is going to shut down Antonio Brown? Corner is an issue of concern still. Keith McGill is out. He was a reserve safety, and they brought in Marcus Gilchrist, who is a starter with Houston. Kind of average play, will be 30 years old. Had a 1-year, $3 million deal with Houston, but Oakland said, hey, we'll give you $4 million. So, I don't know. For a guy that's 30 years old, whose numbers seem to be dropping, I mean, he had 6 passes defended. Not bad. I don't mean to disrespect. Marcus Gilchrist is not a terrible safety, but it'll be interesting to see how it works out. 30 years old, got a 1-year, $4 million deal. So overall, I'd say that if everyone on the offense can stay healthy, the really key on offense is going to be tackle. How do your who starts at tackle, and how well do they play? If the tackles perform well, the offense should be excellent. You've got really good players at the skill positions, really good quarterback, but on defense, are you going to be able to generate pass rush? And are you going to be able to, have corners that can shut down wide receivers? The Raiders should be better. I think the Raiders have improved their team. But are they going to be able to compete with teams like Denver and Kansas City, or the Chargers even for that matter, for the division? I don't know. I love John Gruden. I'm a huge John Gruden fan. I hope he has a great year. Would love to see John Gruden do well. Go Chucky. I've long admired the guy. But I could see the Raiders finishing last in the division this year. But then maybe next year, you're able to fill up some of those final holes at corner and maybe tackle. But those are not easy positions to fill, corner and tackle, It's not easy to find shutdown corners. It's not easy to find tackles. So we'll see. We'll see how the Raiders do. I'm rooting for you. Good luck. If you like this video, please click subscribe, because we are going to have some of the best coverage of the NFL on YouTube. At the end of the preseason, we're going to break down the final rosters of all 32 teams. And then each week, we're going to preview the upcoming week's games. And in addition, in the middle of the week, we're going to review the previous week's games. So make sure you click subscribe, because there is going to be some great stuff and you do not want to miss it. Thank you so much.